This is Yoon Seo-rin. She is carrying my child, and she will be my wife.
Kang Tae-sung reached off stage and brought her out. The woman was visibly pregnant, dressed in floor-length ivory silk, moving carefully in heels that were too high for someone 6 months along. She held his hand the way someone holds a railing, not affection, just steadiness. The room had been mid-applause when he did it, and the applause died the way sound dies in a theater when something goes wrong. Not all at once, in patches. Tae-sung spoke into the microphone without looking at the crowd first. This is Yoon Seo-rin. She is carrying my child, and she will be my wife. Stella was seated 12 feet from the stage. She had helped design this event. Her name was in the program notes under International Press Strategy. Yet the centerpiece on her table, white ranunculus and sculptural steel stems, she had approved from a florist's mock-up 3 weeks ago. She had been to this venue 4 times in the last 2 months alone. She knew every exit. Mira was beside her in a white dress with a navy ribbon at the waist, 5 years old, eating the last of her dessert with the focused contentment of a child who has no idea the room has stopped breathing. The board members at the adjacent table did not look at Stella. That was how she knew they had known. 2 security personnel in dark suits approached from her left. Stella looked at them once. Then she set her napkin on the table, folded it the same way she always did, and stood. She straightened Mira's ribbon. Mira looked up, confused, a little smear of chocolate at the corner of her mouth. We're going? Stella took her hand. We're going. She did not look at Tae-sung. She did not look at Seo-rin. She walked toward the main doors with her shoulders level and her pace even, and 200 people watched her do it and said nothing because there was nothing to say. The cameras that had been on the stage slowly turned. The footage would be everywhere by morning. Not the announcement, her exit. That was the image that broke first. The doors closed behind them. Stop right here for 1 second. If this story already has you feeling something, the comments need to know. Like, subscribe, and tell me, did she deserve that? I'll be reading every single one. 7 years before that night, Stella James landed in Seoul in November with 2 carry-on bags, a consulting contract, and no interest in staying longer than 8 weeks. Worse, she was 29, Eritrean-born, raised between Asmara and Washington, D.C., educated at the London School of Economics, and fluent in Tigrinya, Arabic, English, and functional French. She had been hired by a London-based advisory firm to assess the Kong Group's expansion viability into African and European markets. It was a 6-week engagement. She had 3 other projects queued after it. The first meeting with Kang Tae-sung lasted 3 hours. He was 34, the eldest son of a dynasty that had been building infrastructure across South Korea for 60 years, and he moved through rooms the way men do when they have never once been told to wait. He opened the meeting by presenting his European strategy. 40 minutes in, Stella stopped him. She did not raise her hand. She set her pen down. "This won't work," she said. "Now, the distribution assumption is wrong and the regulatory timeline is off by at least 14 months. If you move forward with this structure, you'll spend 18 months and significant capital to reach a wall your legal team should have caught before this deck was built." The room went very still. Tae-sung looked at her for a long moment. Not with anger, with the specific attention of a man who is recalibrating. "Show me," he said. She did. For 40 minutes, using his own numbers, she walked the room through exactly where and why the strategy failed. When she finished, Tae-sung thanked his other advisors and asked everyone except Stella to leave. They talked for another 2 hours. She rewrote the strategic framework on a legal pad. He ordered food brought in without asking if she was hungry, which irritated her. And then the food arrived and she realized she hadn't eaten since the plane, which irritated her more. She extended her contract to 12 weeks. By week 10, she knew she was in trouble. Not because he was charming. He was, but she had been around charming men. Because he was specific. He remembered the exact statistics she had cited in their first meeting. He asked real questions, the kind that required actual thought to answer. When she made an error in a projection, a small one, a rounding issue in a third-tier model, he caught it before she did and said nothing about it until they were alone, and then he mentioned it once, quietly, and moved on. He never made her feel small. That was unusual enough to notice. She went back to London in January. She was in Seoul again in March. Now, by August, she had restructured her consulting practice around a single primary client. She told herself it was the work. It was partly the work. Tae-sung proposed in a way that surprised her, not with a grand gesture, but with a direct question, the two of them sitting at his kitchen table at 11 at night going over contract language, and he simply looked up and said, "I want to marry you. I've wanted to for several months. I'm telling you now because I don't want to wait anymore." She put her pen down. "I'll need time to think about it." "I know." She thought about it for 3 weeks. She said yes on a Tuesday morning, over the phone, before he'd even said good morning. He laughed, a real one, not a polished one, and she noted that she had made him laugh like that 3 times now, and each time it had cost her something. And they married quietly. A civil ceremony in Seoul, 30 guests, no press. Madame Kang Bok-hee wore a pale gray structured suit and did not smile in a single photograph. She hugged Stella once, briefly, the way you touch something you're not sure is clean. Stella noted it. She filed it away. What came next was 6 years. 6 years of building something real inside a family that treated her presence as a variable rather than a constant. Stella opened the African licensing corridor in the 2nd year of their marriage. It took her 14 months of travel, relationship cultivation, and regulatory navigation across 4 countries. The corridor generated $340 million annually within 3 years. The Kang Group's international division, which had been a modest line item before she arrived, became the fastest-growing segment of the company. Now, she gave interviews in 3 languages. She sat on 2 international trade boards. She did all of it while learning Korean well enough to understand what was being said about her in rooms where people assumed she couldn't. Mira was born in the 2nd year. Stella was back in a board meeting 11 weeks later, not because she had to be, because the project was at a critical juncture and she was the only person who could close it. She brought Mira's baby monitor to the office for 2 weeks. Nobody mentioned it. She would have preferred they did. Director Moon Hyuk came into the picture at a state dinner in the 4th year. Tae-sung had been seated beside him at a policy roundtable and spent most of the dinner on his phone. When Moon Hyuk raised a proposal about infrastructure development, something that directly intersected with 3 active Kang Group contracts, Tae-sung dismissed it in a single sentence without looking up. Moon Hyuk's face did something that took only a second, and then was gone. Stella, seated across the table, saw it clearly. She sent flowers to Moon Hyuk's office the next morning. Yellow tulips in a clean white box, no card beyond her name. 2 weeks later, she requested a lunch. They met at a restaurant she had chosen, neutral territory, nothing Kang adjacent, and she spent the meal asking him genuine questions about his policy work, and she listened the way people rarely do in those rooms, without looking for her own angle. They had lunch 4 more times over the next year. Tae-sung never asked about it. The signs that something was shifting came 14 months before the gala. She noticed it first in the legal documents. Small things. Restructuring language in subsidiary agreements, a new attorney on correspondence she had always been copied on, and then wasn't. She asked Tae-sung about it once. He said it was administrative. He was looking at his phone when he said it. Then the family dinners. Madame Bok-hee had always been cold, but there is a specific quality to coldness when it becomes purposeful. She began making remarks about legacy at the table. Careful remarks, the kind with enough plausible innocence to deflect a direct response. Remarks about the importance of cultural continuity, about what it meant to carry a family name forward correctly. She said these things while serving food, while pouring tea, or in the gaps between conversation, until they accumulated into something that had the shape of a prepared argument. Tae-sung did not redirect her. He cut his food and kept eating. Stella contacted a firm in London 3 weeks after that dinner, a firm with no relationship to the Kang Group's legal network. She flew there herself, told Tae-sung it was a client meeting, which was technically true, and spent 2 days with attorneys going through 14 pages of her existing contractual position within the Kang Group's international structure. What she found was that the African licensing corridor, which she had built and which routed through a subsidiary she had registered during the initial structuring phase, was documented in a way that gave her considerably more legal standing than anyone had thought to review. And the subsidiary, Jamesbridge International, had been registered in her name as the founding consultant. The agreements required her authorization to renew. The Kang Group's own attorneys had signed off on the structure without reading it carefully enough. The London attorneys told her she had significant leverage. She told them she was not ready to use it yet. She went home to Seoul. She made dinner. She helped Mira with her letters. She watched Tae-sung work late in his study and thought about the man at the kitchen table who had looked up from a contract and said he didn't want to wait anymore, and she understood that person was either gone or had never been the whole of him. She called Park Ji-soo the following week. Ji-soo was an investigative journalist at one of South Korea's most respected outlets. Methodical, patient. I'm not interested in gossip, only in documentation. Stella met her for coffee and gave her a single off-record conversation. She told Ji-soo she wasn't ready. She told her to wait. Ji-soo said she was good at waiting. Stella believed her. She spent the next 11 months moving quietly, not desperately, deliberately, the way her grandmother Nardos had taught her by example, the way women from places that have survived invasions learn to move. She cultivated the Moon-hyuk relationship without rushing it. She supported his infrastructure initiative in a written statement for an international trade forum. She mentioned his work in a Financial Times profile on emerging Asian policy frameworks, unprompted, and his office called her the same afternoon to thank her. She gathered the land scandal documentation over 6 months, records connecting Tae-sung's late father to a 1990s displacement in a rural Korean province, a suppressed internal audit, payments to officials, families who had signed NDAs under pressure, and some of whom were willing to be interviewed now that enough time had passed. She built the file carefully. Nothing rushed. Nothing that could be challenged on process. She packed it into a folder and left it with Ji-soo in September. The gala was in November. The morning after the gala, the footage was on every major network. Not the announcement. Stella's exit. 47 seconds of footage from a camera near the stage. The way she folded the napkin. The way she fixed Mira's ribbon. The child's face. Confused, trusting, completely unaware. Stella's hand taking hers. And on that walk across the room, the doors, the internet named it before breakfast. Not with a hashtag, just with a phrase that spread. She didn't break. People watched it the way they watch something that costs them something to witness. Stella woke at 5:30. She made Mira's breakfast. Soft eggs, toast cut into small triangles the way Mira preferred. She answered no press calls. She had a video call with her London attorneys at 7 and was dressed and at the table before they dialed in. By 8, she had 3 decisions made and communicated. The first was that the African licensing corridor renewal, due in 6 weeks, would not proceed under Kang Group terms. Jamesbridge International was beginning a formal separation process. The documentation was already with the London firm. When the second was a message to Director Moon-hyuk's office. Not a call, a message, 3 sentences. She had supported his infrastructure initiative and would continue to do so through Jamesbridge's new independent structure. She was available to meet at his convenience. She hoped he was well. His office responded before noon. He was available Thursday. The third was a single text to Park Ji-soo. 2 words. It's time. Ji-soo's first article ran on Tuesday. Not the land scandal. That was the second article. The first was quieter. A documented reconstruction of the Kang Group's international expansion over the past 6 years, the specific financial contributions of Jamesbridge International, and the legal structure of the licensing agreements. It read like a business story. It was a business story. It was also a map. Invisible to anyone who understood what they were reading, of exactly where Stella stood. Tae-sung's attorneys called Stella's London firm within 4 hours of publication. Her attorneys responded that Ms. James was unavailable and would be in contact when she had availability. That was a Thursday. She met with Moon-hyuk on Thursday evening. They had dinner at the same restaurant she had chosen for their first lunch, 4 years earlier. He already knew most of it. The footage, the announcement, the business story. He was not a man who required explanation. He told her that the Kang Group's domestic infrastructure contracts were coming up for a scheduled government review in the next quarter. He said it the way people say things when they want you to understand the implication without them having to state it plainly. Stella thanked him for dinner. Ji-soo's second article ran the following Tuesday. This one was the land scandal. It ran with documentation, the suppressed audit, the payment records, interviews with 2 families from the displaced province who had agreed to be named. It was thorough, sourced, and immune to the kind of legal pressure the Kang Group's attorneys attempted to apply within 6 hours of publication. Ji-soo had been waiting 18 months. She had done her own work in the interim. The article was airtight. The Kang Group's stock dropped 9% in the first trading session. By the end of the week, it was 11. 3 foreign partners issued statements of concern. The infrastructure contracts were flagged for government review. The licensing corridor was going dark. And the Kang Group board convened an emergency session on a Friday afternoon that Tae-sung was not invited to chair. Board member Chairman Lim Dong-chul, 71 years old, the longest-serving member, a man who had known Tae-sung's father and had watched the family's reputation sustain things that should not have been sustainable, contacted Stella's London attorneys on Friday evening. He did not want a fight, the message said. He wanted a conversation. Stella responded that she was available Monday. Her attorneys would be present. She would select the location. She selected a hotel conference room in a building that had no association with the Kang Group. She arrived 7 minutes early and was seated at the head of the table when Lim and the other board members came in. She had the restructuring proposal already printed and at each seat. Seo-rin had not left the Kang family home since the gala. She had not planned on it being like this. She had been told, by Tae-sung, by his mother, by the careful architecture of a relationship that had been reconstructed over 18 months of calls and visits, and a dinner in Tokyo, where he had been very deliberate about what he said and how he said it, that she was coming home, that it had always been her, that the marriage to Stella had been a chapter, not a life. She was 32 and 6 months pregnant, and she had believed him. The house was Madame Bok-hee's domain. Every room, every schedule, every meal. Seo-rin moved through it like a guest who had been assigned a room but not a key. Bok-hee was not unkind to her. She was something more complicated than unkind. She was managerial. Seo-rin was the vessel for the next Kang heir and was treated accordingly. She found the communications on a Sunday morning, 3 weeks after the gala. She had not been looking for anything. She was using Tae-sung's study to charge her laptop. Hers was in the bedroom and she didn't want to wake him, and the tablet on his desk was already open. She moved it to make room for her charging cable and the screen lit up, already open to an archived message thread. She read the first line. She sat down in the chair. She read the rest of it, slowly. Then she read it again. The thread was between Tae-sung and Madame Bok-hee, dated 16 months earlier. It discussed the gala as a planned event, not a spontaneous decision, a strategic one. There was language about realigning the company's public image with Korean cultural expectations, following concerns raised by 2 major domestic institutional investors. There was language about the international licensing structure and the risk of its concentration in a single external party. There was language about Seo-rin, her name, her profile, her willingness, written in the same register as the language about contracts. She was a solution, documented as one. She sat in the chair for a long time, long enough that the light in the room changed. Then she picked up her phone and called her sister, who told her she needed to get out of that house. Then she called her attorney. Then, after a long pause, she scrolled to a number she had found 3 days ago and had been looking at without calling. She called Stella. Stella answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was even. She did not sound surprised. Seo-rin did not know how to start, so she said the most direct thing she could. I found the messages. I know what this was. Stella said nothing for a moment. Are you safe? It was not the response Seo-rin had expected. She had prepared for something colder. Yes. Do you have an attorney? I called one this morning. Good, Stella said. Use them. Don't sign anything the family presents you with until your attorney has reviewed it independently. Make sure they understand you want everything in writing. Seo-rin was quiet. Then she said, I have some documents, messages. I want you to have them. Stella said she understood. The call lasted 11 minutes. Afterward, Seo-rin sat by the window in Tae-sung's study with her hand on her stomach and looked out at the Kang family's garden, immaculate, expensive, seasonless in the way of things that require constant management to appear natural. And she understood that she was going to have to leave before she had a child in this house, because once she had a child in this house, it would take considerably more than she currently had to get them both out. She left 10 days later. Her attorney had negotiated a support arrangement that the Kang Group's legal team, already managing 3 simultaneous crises, accepted faster than they might have otherwise. Stella's attorneys had sent a single communication to Seo-rin's attorney 3 days before the signing. Not instructions, information. Irrelevant case precedent and documentation that strengthened Seo-rin's position considerably. No strings attached, no credit claimed. Seo Rin's attorney mentioned it to her afterward. She thought about that for a long time. The board meeting was 90 minutes. Stella presented the restructuring proposal for 30 of them. She had brought 2 of her London attorneys and a financial advisor she had worked with for 4 years. Chairman Lim had brought 3 board members and the Kang Group's general counsel, who had reviewed the Jamesbridge documents the previous weekend and arrived looking like a man who had not slept well. The proposal was clean. Jamesbridge International would formalize as a standalone entity, retaining the African licensing agreements and the existing European partner relationships. A new international advisory structure would be created, reporting to an independent chair. The Kang Group would retain a minority equity interest in the new entity and would benefit from the licensing revenue as a passive stakeholder rather than an operational one. The chair position had her name on it. Lim read through it at the table. He was a slow reader. Nobody rushed him. When he finished, he looked up and asked 2 questions, both about the equity structure. Stella answered both without referring to her notes. He nodded once, the way someone does when they've confirmed something they already suspected. The vote was 4-1. The dissenting vote was Tai Sung's proxy, a board seat held by a family attorney. By the end of the following week, that attorney had been formally removed from his seat after a conflict of interest review that had been pending, unresolved, for 7 months and was now expedited. Tae Sung came to her residence on a Wednesday evening, 2 days after the vote. She let him in because Mira was at her friend's house and she wanted this finished before Mira came home. He looked like a man who had stopped sleeping. Not dramatically, just the specific flatness that comes from days of sustained adrenaline with no resolution. He stood in the entryway and looked at the apartment, which was hers alone now. New furniture, a few things she had kept, Mira's drawings on the refrigerator. He asked how she had done it, not aggressively. He was past aggression. When he asked it the way someone asks when they're trying to understand a loss they can't locate the beginning of. Stella looked at him for a moment. "You didn't lose the empire, Tae Sung," she said. "You handed it to me the night you walked me out of that room." He stood there. He didn't have a response to that, which was the truest thing about him she'd seen in a long time. She opened the door. He left. She closed it and stood in the entryway for a moment. Then she went to the kitchen to start dinner before Mira got home. 6 months after the gala, Jamesbridge International held its first independent board meeting in Seoul. The company retained all 6 of the original African licensing agreements and had signed 3 new European partnerships in the months following the restructuring. Its projected valuation had exceeded the initial estimates by a margin that financial publications spent considerable column space analyzing. The analysis mostly focused on the structural approach, the speed of the pivot, the caliber of the existing relationships. Stella was in the Financial Times twice. Once in a profile, once quoted in a piece about the restructuring of large family-held conglomerates and the risks of concentrated informal power. She did not give many interviews. The ones she gave were precise and brief. The Kang Group still existed. The tower still stood in Seoul with the family name on it, but the infrastructure contracts were under government oversight pending the completion of the audit triggered by the land scandal review. The family's political connections had contracted significantly. Then Tae Sung remained a wealthy man. The restructuring had not been designed to destroy him, only to remove what was Stella's from what was his. He moved through Seoul with less certainty than before, which was the most significant change, because the certainty had been the whole of his manner. Madame Bak Hee had not appeared at a public event since Jisoo's second article. Seo Rin had a son, healthy, full-term, born in February. She was living in an apartment her attorney had secured as part of the support arrangement. She was not in contact with the Kang family. She was, slowly, building something of her own. Small, careful, nothing like what she had imagined this year would look like, but entirely hers. She and Stella were not friends, but there was a number in each of their phones, and neither had deleted it. Mira was 7. She had started a new school year and had made 2 friends, and was working on reading chapter books, which she found more effortful than she felt was fair. She knew, in the incomplete way children know things, that her parents did not live together, and that something had happened at a party and that her mother had built a company. When a boy in her class said something about the gala, something he had clearly heard from his parents, imprecisely rendered, Mira looked at him and said, with the particular calm of a child raised in a certain kind of household, "My mom owns a company." She returned to her lunch. Stella watched her from across the kitchen table one evening, coloring a picture of what appeared to be a horse but might have been a dog. Mira looked up. Grandma Nardo said you're like her. What does that mean? Stella set down her tea. It means we know how to wait, she said, and we know what to build while we're waiting. Mira considered this. She seemed to find it acceptable. She went back to the horse. Stella sat with that for a moment. Then she got up and cleared the dishes. The office Stella worked from now was on the 14th floor of a building in central Seoul that had no association with the Kang Group. The view faced east. The furniture was her own. Not the careful, approved selections of a family home, but things she had chosen over the past 6 months without consulting anyone. A desk in pale ash wood, a low credenza, one chair for guests and no more, because she was not interested in rooms that accommodated crowds. She stood at the window at the end of a Thursday, the city going amber in the late afternoon. Once she was 36 years old. She had built 2 things in her life, the licensing corridor and now this. The corridor had been built inside someone else's empire. This was the difference. This belonged entirely to herself and to the daughter asleep in the next room of an apartment where every piece of furniture and every picture on the wall was something Stella had chosen without asking permission. She did not take revenge. Revenge is loud. It makes noise and leaves marks and hands the person who hurt you a story where they still matter. She did not give him that. She took the only thing that actually outlasts power, the ability to build it again, from the beginning, with her daughter watching. The empire he thought he was protecting from her had always needed her more than it needed him. Or she simply waited until the world could see it too. She turned from the window. She had a call in 10 minutes. She went to her desk. On a Tuesday morning, 2 months later. Stella is in a government building in Seoul for a routine contract review. James Bridge has expanded into an infrastructure licensing partnership, and there are documents to sign. She arrives early. She sits in a waiting area with a coffee she bought from the cart outside. She's wearing a charcoal double-breasted suit, pearl earrings, nothing else. Her phone is in her bag. She is just sitting. A woman across the waiting area looks at her for a moment with the expression of someone who recognizes a face, but is not certain from where. Stella notices. She gives the woman a small, neutral smile and looks back at her coffee. The woman keeps looking. And then she leans toward the man beside her, her husband, presumably, and says something quietly. The man looks at Stella. He looks a long time. Then he says to his wife, "That's the woman from the video, the one at the party." His wife nods. "She walked out like that," the man says, and something in his voice is not gossip or curiosity. It is the sound of a person who witnessed something they did not expect to be moved by, and were. Stella finishes her coffee. Her name is called. She stands, straightens her jacket, and walks through the door. Outside, in the city, her daughter is at school learning to read chapter books, finding it more difficult than she thinks it should be, working through it anyway. Somewhere across Seoul, in a building with his family's name on it, Kang Tae-sung is in a meeting about a problem Stella no longer has to solve. And James Bridge International opens for business in Nairobi next month. The empire is not what he built. It never was. I need you to tell me something in the comments. What was the moment she had you? Was it the walkout, the board meeting? Or was it something quieter than that? Like subscribe and drop it below. If you've been watching this channel and haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. There are more stories like this one coming, and you do not want to miss what's next.